Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. This is an It's It. It is an ice cream sandwich native to the San Francisco Bay Area. It's massive and covered in chocolate. Sound good? Yeah. Well, it sounded good. This is Russell. He's a security engineer at Netflix. And he decided to have not one, but two of these, throw them into a blender, and then pour a bunch of whole milk over the top because Russell likes food. Now, he had done all this and was all ready to have the most caloric milkshake of all time, and the blender was having none of it. Instead of a delicious milkshake, he got a blinking red light from the base of the blender, and that's it. But that's not all. This is Mike. Mike is another security engineer at Netflix, and he knows the two of the things that Netflix values are teamwork and selflessness. And Mike saw his teammates struggling, so he selflessly threw himself into action to help with this. And Mike is a world-class engineer. Because Netflix only hires world-class talent. And so he did what any world-class engineer would do and unplugged it and plugged it back in again. This didn't resolve the problem. So instead, the two of them put their heads together and decided to push all of the buttons on the front. It didn't work. However, fortunately for them, I was there, sans helmet, and I saw them struggling with a user interface. I said to myself, I'm a user interface engineer. I know how to solve this. Do we have any user interface engineers here? A few? Okay, good. So I strode into action using my immense user interface knowledge, unplugged the blender, and plugged it back in again. That failed, so I pushed all the buttons on the front. You can guess what happened. So we put all three of us, our heads together, and thought, what should we do about this blender? We realized we had one thing left to try. Pulled out our phone and Googled the error message. Typed in the name of blender, blinking red light, and lo and behold, the answer came to us. The lid was misaligned. You need to take the lid and rotate it 1/4 turn, and then you will get your delicious milkshake. But as our eyes, thus enlightened, rose from the phone to look at the lid of the blender, which was misaligned, they went past the lid of the blender and found the wall behind it where this sign was posted, telling us that in order to use the blender, the lid needs to be aligned correctly. This is fantastic. Finally aligned the blender, was happy, Russell got his milkshake, and we all learned a valuable lesson. Nobody reads the documentation. It was right there in front of us. There was a picture, there were arrows. It was all set up, and we didn't read it. Blender didn't work for us. You can't document your way out of a bad product. Sometimes when working in software, I feel like I've just walked into a kitchen, and there's no refrigerator. I say, hey, what gives? Where's the refrigerator? And then an engineer pipes up and says, oh, there is a refrigerator. It's down the hall, up halfway a flight of stairs, and it has a series of levers you have to pull in order to open it. But don't worry, we've written down which order you need to pull the levers. All right, let's look at a good product. This is my blender at home, and the wall behind it, which does not need a sign explaining how to use the blender. There's a notch in the lid of this blender. And the first time I used it, I put the lid on wrong, and it didn't fit. Picked it up, saw the notch, tab A, slot B. I could figure it out, and I didn't need Google or two other Netflix engineers. But this isn't a blender engineering conference. This is a user interface engineering conference. So the question becomes, what's a UI engineer? We've got all these failures running around. So in my mind, user interface engineering has three parts. Building software, duh. User experience, building something that's useful. And user advocacy, making sure the rest of the team knows about it. The first one is building software. I'm not going to talk about this. That's literally the rest of the conference. But I do have a word of warning here. Does anyone recognize this interface? It looks suspiciously like one because a few weeks ago, the entire state of Hawaii woke up to find a notification on their phone. Incoming ballistic missile. Seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill, which is a bit of a problem because it was a drill. And one of these links, when you click on it, terrifies the entire state of Hawaii, and the other one runs the drill. Can you guess which one? But this isn't the actual interface that Hawaii has. This is one I built. It's a progressive web app. It has all sorts of fancy, fun things that a progressive web app has. It loads quickly. This whole thing comes together in 250 milliseconds. It's offline first. If you want to terrify the entire state of Hawaii, but you're on a shaky connection, it will keep trying until it gets through. Also has 100% code coverage on the tests. Fantastic. There's just one little bit of requirement I missed. Don't unnecessarily terrify an entire state. For me, code is the easy part. We can put together fantastic apps, but if no one wants to use them, then they're not helpful. We want to be more than just people who move tickets from left to right on some Kanban board. So how do we do that? First thing is user experience. The art of UX is less writing code and more where we put on our detective hat and discover what problem the user actually is trying to solve. First step is easy. Ask them. As it turns out, people are surprisingly willing to talk about their problems. Hi, I'm building software. I'm trying to solve your problems. Oh, I have a lot of them. Let me list them out. You might want to, put a restriction on that. As for me, like I said, I'm an engineer at Netflix, and I work on the monitoring and alerting team. So we went out to all the other engineers at Netflix and said, hey, how can we help you build better alerts? And the answer was clear. They all said, hi, I'd love a solve my problems button. I love it. I just log in and there's a button on the center of the screen that said solve my problems. And if I clicked on it, it solved the problems. Henry Ford never actually said this, but I'm going to steal it anyway. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And what he gave them was the Model T, which indeed worked like a faster horse, but it had nothing to do with horses. When you're doing your research, when you're trying to find what problems the user has that you can solve with software, we need to look at user intentions, not the flat requests that they want, because then we'll just be building dozens of solve my problems buttons that don't actually do that. So we did that. We went out and we talked and we got a bunch of feedback and a bunch of responses. So we had to take them and put them into multiple buckets, as we call them user personas. We found two different types of engineer at Netflix. The first wanted an alerting system that looks something like this. They're like, yeah, if it could just look at the 747 cockpit. That's your design inspiration. I want every lever. I want every button. I want to tweak and control everything. This was about 15 to 20% of the engineers. And to be honest, at that point, our system did look something like that. It was a little bit terrifying. The other 80% of engineers said, I just want an alert wizard. I want to just click next and select some things, and then I'm done. And I don't want to control all the things about alerting. I want to go do my job, the one I'm hired to do and get paid to do. So we found out that we were pleasantly had 20% of our users pleasantly happy, and the other 80% had no idea what to do. Now, of course, what we could have done is take that knowledge, go into our silo, sit there and build a product for a year, and then come out, throw the product over the wall, and no one would use it. Because we may have built an alerting wizard, but we didn't build the right one. Instead, we need to talk about user tests. And we had lots of talks about testing so far today. We like tests. We have unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these tests prove that the software works. And a user test proves that the software works well. Actually solves a problem. How do you run a user test? Well, we would, every week, on a Friday, go and rope down some engineers, put them in front of the latest version of our software and say, set up some alerts for your service. That's what the intention was. And then, and this is the hardest part for me, I had to shut up. Because I could sit there and I could guide them to the software and say, click that button, type in there, click that button, click that button. And they would have succeeded. But the software would be useless. I just explained it to the user. Instead, I sat there, shut up, and let them stumble and fail their way through the stuff I just put a whole bunch of time into. Instead, I took notes because the software should explain to the user how to use it. I shouldn't have to sit next to them and explain, well, you gotta rotate the blender lid 1/4 turn. We actually started this fairly early. This is the first version, up on a whiteboard. Secret, confidential Netflix stuff. We would put the whole workflow up on a whiteboard, go into the kitchen, grab a coffee, wait for a victim to walk by and say, hey, you're gonna help us with alerting. They'd look at this and say, that doesn't work for me. We just refactor on the whiteboard. You know how easy that is? We were fixing bugs before, well, we had time to write them. So that's how you do user testing, to bring users in and continually do testing until all of the lights are green, which means the user is able to use the product, and you weren't sitting next to them just screaming internally about how they're screwing everything up. But there's one last thing I'd like to talk about in UI engineering, and that's being a user advocate. Now, I said it earlier, no one came to this conference to be better at moving tickets from the left to the right on some board, right? We want to be better engineers than that. We don't want to say on LinkedIn, oh, I'm a senior ticket mover now. Software engineering is about solving people's problems. And the most important thing I've learned is that users don't want more options. They want the right options. We love adding things to software, new features, new this, new that, new widgets, new notifications, new modals, because it's so much fun, right? You get all this new stuff. Some companies even incentivize. The only way you can get promoted is put out new stuff, and it's no surprise that they get all sorts of new, mediocre stuff, and the other stuff dies. No one actually solves problems. The first version of the wizard that we built looked like the IRS had exploded. We set out to make something simple, and we failed completely. So we sat there and cut away option after option. It was painful. I liked those options. They were useful, but they were just too confusing to explain to every single user. And even then, we had a much shorter form, and they said, there's still so much on this page. So to take that page and chop into bits until the user made one decision on every single page. This is the first page we had. That's it. You just needed to know the name of your application. And we had autocomplete in there, so really all you needed to know were the first 4 letters of your application. So you need to go to the design table and say, we need to simplify things and cut things down so we only give users what they want instead of all the cool things we want to build. Speaking of, users don't care about technical debt. I know we love talking about technical debt, right? Going to refactor this and add that out and switch from Angular to Vue to React and then back to Vue and then back to Angular and then keep going all the way back and forth until we get promoted out of that job. But in reality, we're not solving any new problems. We're just fiddling around with the stuff we like to do, and the users are left out in the cold. What's the most successful back-end language as measured by number of websites that run it? PHP. The number of websites that run something other than PHP is essentially a rounding error. The entire web runs in PHP. And there are some people who claim, and I kind of agree with them, that any PHP written is technical debt. But where I disagree is that who cares? So what if it's technical debt? It's obviously out there solving real problems, and we're sitting here trying to fiddle with yet another Go microservice. Users don't care about tabs versus spaces. You know who you are. Just pick one. And finally, and I'd like to come back next year, but I don't think I will after this slide, users don't care about Angular. They care that the app loads quickly. They care that the application doesn't sit there and burn lots of CPU cycles doing all sorts of change detection. And they care that their app doesn't break when they're on a shaky connection. And Angular and RxJS give us all those things, but let's not lose sight of what we're actually out trying to do. It's a little bit of a downer, so I'll leave you with one more thing. How many of you have heard this? Either on Twitter or someone in person, things like that. Oh, UI engineering isn't real engineering. They use JavaScript. This is Linux, which has the most intuitive UI known to mankind. I don't know what's happening here. I think a package hasn't been either was installed or tried to install, something went wrong. It may have succeeded with something going wrong. I don't know. But despite all of this, the free software community still likes to talk about the year of Linux on the desktop. When, as we saw earlier, when the other 99.73% of people on the planet would realize that free software was just better. We could stomp out that evil Microsoft, which I'm probably showing my age talking about evil Microsoft. They're all cool and open source now. But back then, it was all about we gotta take down Windows and all that. We still, in 2018, I still see conversations of people saying, when will people wake up and start using Linux? And I hate to tell all these people, but the year of Linux on the desktop was 2013. In 2013, the #1 selling computer on Amazon was one of these. It's a Chromebook. It runs Chrome OS. Chrome OS is an open source distribution of Linux. But instead of saying what we really need to do, what users really care about is compiling more things, a bunch of UI engineers came to that and said, why don't we ask the user what they want? They don't want to talk to their computer through a terminal. It's cool for us. No one else cares. They want to get to Facebook. They want to talk to their computer through a browser. So they built an operating system around Chrome. Users don't care about all sorts of fancy rsync scripts. What they do care about is not losing their term paper the night before it's due. So they built in a whole cloud backup system. You can take one of these things, throw it into a shredder, open up a new one, log in, all your stuff is still there. And users want something that is economical, it's cheap. So instead of adding in 60 bajillion gigabytes of RAM so they could run 2 Slacks at once, they kept things simple. And the results shown. Every year since 2013, the #1 computer, sometimes the top 3, sometimes the top 5 computers on Amazon are Linux-based. We did that. UI engineers. That's real engineering. Thank you.